O'Reilly. You need parts? O'Reilly Auto Parts has parts. Need them fast? We've got fast. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Product availability. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.
Clean your gun and tune your bow. We're the Hunting Collective Show. Calling hunters new and old. The Hunting Collective Show. Where facts are facts and opinions are subjective. You're listening now to the Hunting Collective.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 174, where I am completely and totally faking my enthusiasm because I am very, very tired, but I am joined by Phil, the engineer. Phil, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. You said you're faking your enthusiasm. I honestly don't sense any enthusiasm, real or fake, so you're doing a bad job.
Oh, I'm doing a bad job. Well, I'm totally talking like this in a very monotone way, so you do not hear the pure desperation and vocal fry that's happening on my end right now, because we are on day, Ford Van Fossan, what day of the turkey trek are we on? I don't know what day it is, and I definitely can't count to 10 at this point. What day are we on?
It's a Monday, and I don't know, 12 maybe? 10?
Could be anywhere between 5 and 12.
3 and 3, and yeah, maybe
we
maybe
started.
9.
We technically started on the 10th, and it is now the 19th.
9.
So 9 days on the turkey trek. 9 days of glorious, glorious turkey hunting. I am currently sitting in a unknown town in Nebraska, where we are on the 3rd whistle stop of the turkey trek 2021. I guess we say Trek for Turkeys. Is that right, Ford? Trek for Turkeys with First Lite and NWTF, where we're doing like a telethon in a non-live format to raise funds through memberships for NWTF. We are 9 days into that telethon. No one has known it's going on to this point, so it's a bit of a backwards move. But we got Ford Van Fossan here, who is the czar of conservation at First Lite. And he's going to update us on exactly what we need to do. And then we're going to tell you some stories from our trip thus far. And Phil, all you really need to do is sit back and get excited for your upcoming first ever turkey hunt. That's your only job here, buddy. Okay?
All right. I'll do it well. I'll make you proud.
What I'd like for you to do in the interim is get up at 3:30 in the morning and drive around for an hour and a half and then walk around in the woods for about an hour and then go home just to practice for turkey hunting here in a couple weeks. Okay,
that sounds like it would be a terrible training montage in a movie.
Yes. Yes, I would like you to run across the beach with a turkey decoy on your head. Yes, please, please. Anyway, Ford Van Fossan, before we get into any of the stories, the laughs, the mishaps from the turkey tour, tell people our content would have debuted yesterday, which is Monday. This is Tuesday. But we have a bunch of content coming out for a very important reason. If you want to tell everybody exactly what's going on.
Yeah, we're starting the documentation of aforementioned Trek for Turkeys Monday on First Lite's Instagram story. We'll be hitting post too, but basically we'll be telling the story of the trip whilst driving folks to sign up for NWTF for memberships. We're trying to hit 1,000 memberships by the end of the month. That's sort of the goal here, and to do so, we're ripping around the West, hitting 4 different states, visiting some habitat projects, and killing turkeys.
We have done all of that this week and last week, and we have roughly the rest of this week to go. We're in Nebraska. We're going to be in Wyoming, visit a habitat project up there. We just got done hunting some beautiful WMAs in different places in Nebraska where NWTF has supported and done habitat work. We've been working with a guy named Luke Gazak. I always get everyone's last name wrong. That's probably nowhere near how you say his last name. But Luke is a NWTF forester. We've also been hanging out with Jared McJunkin, who works for the NWTF on a regional biologist level, and really been learning about what they do, learning about why it's important, and hunting some of the places that they've worked to help improve in terms of habitat, especially in this area of Nebraska and other areas of states that we've hunted. So it's been cool to learn about not only turkey hunting out west in great detail, as we'll tell you some stories, but also what the NWTF does. So very seriously, as we talk about conservation on this show, we have Shane Mahoney coming up, the great and powerful Shane Mahoney coming up for a good interview about some of these subjects and about what conservation really means across the landscape of, as Shane might put it, human existence or human relationships with wildlife. This is just one instance of an opportunity for everybody out there to go to First Lite's Instagram. You'll see Instagram stories that started yesterday, that continue today, and will go on throughout the week, of us hunting. Ford, myself, Jonah, Bell, and Max Benz have been filming us. We've had, as the aforementioned folks from the NWTF. We've got Kevin Harlander, who, as I sit in a hotel room, is out right now crawling around in the snow trying to kill a turkey by himself, I might add. He's pretty hardcore. But it's been a joint effort between NWTF and First Lite and Meat Eater to kill some turkeys and also raise awareness for the fact that memberships are down and banquets are not as easy to put together for NWTF as they have been in the past. And so this is all our way to drive attention for that. And I think it's we're going to talk about how it's gone. But Ford, how would you handicap where we are right now in our trek for turkeys?
You mean the update of how things are going?
Yeah.
Well, I think they're going really well given the weather conditions that we've been dealt. It has been wintry, to say the least, I would say, and snow and blow and cold and all that stuff is not what you think about necessarily when it comes to turkey hunting, and certainly not what you think about when it comes to successful turkey hunting. So the fact that we've killed 7, I think.
Yeah, we can call it 8 because Luke, the aforementioned forester from the NWTF, shot one yesterday with us, so we'll call it 8.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. So anyhow, all things considered, I mean, have we filled every single tag we had? No, but have we filled some tags in some incredibly inclement conditions? Yes. So yeah, I can't complain, man. I think it's coming off well.
Yes. Yeah, we've learned a ton about the NWTF, hanging out with guys like Jared McJunkin, who is a wealth of knowledge. They spend their lives around turkeys. Just to be able to hang out with them is enough for me. And yeah, we had a great morning yesterday. You guys will eventually see the tail end of our Nebraska trip, we had an amazing encounter with a big tom here in the Piney Ridges of Nebraska, and got some excellent footage of that tom.
Yeah, Max sent me a clip. It looked straight planet Earth-esque.
It is wild. Yeah, it's absolutely wild. Yeah, and so some slow motion footage, a bird dancing the decoys. He came in on the string from a couple hundred yards away, down a hill, up the other side, crossed a fence, which turkeys tend not to want to do. And Ford knows that from his experience in South Dakota. Crossed the fence, came right in the decoys. We let him do a little dancing, make a little love, and then we ended it with the TSS. Federal Premium TSS real quickly there. But the day before, Kevin Harlander got a couple of birds, and a couple of days prior to that, Ford Van Fossan, you and I doubled.
We did indeed. That was a joyous moment. I think folks will see and perhaps think I overreacted, but when you've been hunting turkeys and blowing snow for, at that point, 4 or 5 days, and you finally connect with not one but two birds, and in so doing tag out in South Dakota, one gets excited.
They tend to get excited. Now, I've told Phil this, and I will reiterate, that I'm not sure the psychological things that happen, but whenever, and it's really just you play the game of pursuing turkeys, you get up early, you run hard, you sit out in the snow, you freeze your ass off, and when you finally have success, everything is better in your life. Like the sky is bluer, whatever fast food hamburger we ended up being coerced to eat that evening was delicious. The bed is softer. Everything is sweeter at this point. Partly, I think, because you've won the game, and the game that Ford and I played for 5 straight days in 2 different states in high 30 to 40 mile an hour wind gusts, blowing snow, extreme cold, frozen calls, frozen everything. Did a lot of driving, did a lot of walking, and to finally get to the point where we're in South Dakota and we got 2 birds on the ground, you have every right to. I feel like you fell onto the ground.
I would say I laid upon the ground.
You laid upon the ground
in
excitement and kicked into the air like a bicycle kick into the air.
I don't remember the bicycle kick, but it doesn't seem unlikely.
It was I remember there being some sort of kicking. But we were excited. And I guess the story goes that it can be done if you're out west hunting early season like we were on opening days in some of the western states. Turkey hunting can be very successful in snow. It can be very successful in rain or wind. But boy, it makes it a whole ton harder. The success we've had here on our 3rd stop of the turkey tour has been aided by some warm weather days, which has now switched today. I'm looking out the window. It's muddy and snowy and windy again. But we've had some warm weather days, some fired up birds, and that's where really the beautiful moments of turkey hunting come. But you can scratch out if you're out there right now listening and it's not great weather where you're at. You can scratch them out. You just got to stay on it. Got to stay persistent. You got to spend the time. Ford and I, we definitely spent the time.
Yeah. 2 days. Talking scratch out, we were fortunate to have Rick Hutton of Fish Hunt Fight Gear, and at our first stop there in Montana, and Katie Miachetti from Modern Huntsman's, whose name I probably also mispronounced, but they were able to kill 2 birds in borderline whiteout conditions.
Yes.
And that was just full on grit, borderline spot and stalk turkey hunting. But Rick really saved the day in Montana with those 2 birds, filling some tags, and turning the frown upside down on some real inclement weather.
Yep, and that brings to mind a couple things we need to address with the audience. You'll see it in the footage, I'm sure. Ford passed up a Jake on the first day. You want to just talk about that a little bit, Ford, and what it was like to have me give you shit for so long about it?
Everyone, I would say, gave me proverbial feces over it. we're starting this 12 or whatever day hunt. We get there, the weather's lovely, we're hearing birds, and we strike up a bird, and it sounds a little pubic, or like it hasn't gone through puberty, I would say, is I guess what I'm looking for. And
pubic, yeah.
Pubic's not the right word.
No, that's a
turkey that had
intriguing.
not gone through puberty yet. So anyhow,
Yes.
we get in, we set up. Jake sort of gobbles into view with another Jake. I put the gun barrel over it, and I look at its neck closely, and it has a tiny little spurt of beard, and I don't shoot it because I'm thinking to myself, this is a giant turkey trip. Here we are. We're great and powerful turkey hunters. I'm not going to shoot this Jake on the first day. And I don't. And I get back, and as you stated, shit was immediately thrown my way. And in fact, I would come to regret it very much so, given the weather. I mean, it was like I passed this Jake up, and on a dime, the wind started blowing 40 miles an hour. The weather just went to hell, and we struggled to get birds. So I 100% should have shot the Jake. And I would like to emphasize that I am not a person that usually passes Jakes.
Yeah.
I'm always the guy looking to kill the spike. But
yeah.
Here we are doing this big content trip, and I was just inflated about it. I think I thought I had to be someone I wasn't, or I had not.
It sounds like you've done some self-reflection on this.
Yeah, well, we had lots of time to think about it, trudging around the snow, not killing turkeys.
Yeah, we did.
And so, yes, I 100% should have filled that tag. Even more so because, in Montana as a non-resident, I had a general tag and a Region 7 tag. I had 2 tags in my pocket, and absolutely should have filled one of them on the Jake. But, you live and you learn.
Yeah. Well, here in the Hunting Collective, we forgive and we forget. And we'll tell a story about these 2 times we shot. But we definitely, you're right about this, though. We arrived in Montana to beautiful weather. And literally, as soon as I arrived and started getting my tent together and get all my gear out, the wind started to blow. And it did not stop blowing until we were blown the hell out of the state, down to South Dakota. We're licking our wounds headed down to South Dakota. We thought you get inflated. You think you have all this confidence. You have all these goals. I'm over here throwing out double-digit numbers of turkeys that we're going to get, and how if we fill a tag here, where do we go next? And thinking about all these positive outcomes. And we got our butts whooped pretty good there, other than, as you mentioned, Rick Hutton, who is a bit of a turkey. I'm not going to say he's a sharp character, so he's not a savant, but he's a master of
he's
turkeys,
a
I believe.
good turkey killer. Him and old Seth Morris know how to slay turkeys, in particular in Montana, it would appear.
Yeah. And so, Phil, you've heard all about the Jakes. You heard from Tony Peterson that he likes to shoot them. You've kind of heard the self-reflection of Ford here. Where do you stand currently on Jakes in terms of your first hunt?
I don't know. There's some sort of like weird self-pride thing that probably I don't know if I would. I'm sure I would in the moment, but thinking about it right now, I'm like, yeah, no, I don't know if I would.
Oh, you want to go? Okay, all right. What if I'm like, shoot the Jake, Phil, shoot the Jake, or will you be like, quiet, O'Brien, or will you bend to my peer pressure?
Maybe if I'm on my last limb with you, I'm just tired and fed up, and I want things to end quickly. Then
you'll shoot the Jake.
I'll shoot the Jake, yeah.
God, I'm looking forward to this, man. I'm looking forward to a hunt. Every time I post anything about turkeys, I get about a dozen DMs about, like, why didn't you bring Phil? What's wrong with it? You asshole. So anyhow, yes, we eventually made our way to South Dakota. We had a couple of snowy, cold days there. And then on the morning of day 5, is this correct? There's a day 4. It would have been day 4 of hunting, I would say.
It was our second full day in Dakota, I think. Yeah,
so
second full day in Dakota. So, I think day 5 total. Thereabouts.
Day 5. We've got 2 turkeys on the ground, but nothing for me and Ford. We've hunted our butts off. Ford goes in and roosts some birds the night before. We had been out that morning. The wind was blowing. It was cold. No gobbles. A couple gobbles right off the roost, and then it would be completely silent. And it was feeling like it was going to be a real struggle to scratch out a turkey in the time that we had to do it. But we sidled up to the roost. I knew that these birds would gobble in the roost if they got fired up. When they hit the ground, they basically shut up for most of the day. You might hear a gobbler or two at them for the entire time they're on their feet during any point in this day. They're miserable just like we are. They're not warm. They're not happy. They're not content. They're miserable. They're trying to get out of the wind. They're hunkering down. They're getting in the timber wherever they can. And so our strategy was to get up to the roost tree as close as we felt safe, that they wouldn't see us, get in there, put the decoys out, back off, and be quiet. And listen for the fly down. Well, we got quite as you'll see on the content of First Lite's Instagram stories, we got quite the gobble show in the morning. There was, I don't know how many birds lighting up in the tree, maybe 120 yards up the ridge from us.
Oh, yeah.
There were some hens in there yelping, right, that we felt like were behind. Like we were literally on the wrong side of the hens. The gobblers in between us and the hens on the other side of the ridge. So it didn't seem like a great opportunity to start off, but the birds were fired up. And when they flew down, I wasn't quite sure exactly where they flew down, but as soon as we heard them fly down, a gobble lit up way in the distance, or further in the distance than we wanted. And I looked at Ford. I'm like, I think they flew down 500 yards in the other direction.
Yeah, man. I mean, when I heard that hen on sort of the far side of the rise, my heart sank a little. I figured she had just dragged him off the total opposite direction. But it was so far off that a part of me also thought it was a separate turkey, which in fact was the case.
Yeah, it was the case. And so it wasn't too long before, it was still in the, it was still probably prior to shooting light when they flew down, and they're up the ridge. They actually flew, there's four toms, was it?
4 toms, yep.
4 toms fly down and hit the ground. I couldn't see him, but Ford could, one of our camera guys. Jonah could see him. They fly down, they hop up on a log, they're all strutting together. Eventually, Ford gets an eye on them. Eventually, I can hear him spitting and drumming up there. Mm-hmm. No gobbles, no nothing. My strategy was as soon as they hit the ground to start calling, and just kind of very light, almost like tree yelps, like very contented yelps, nothing excited, because these turkeys, when they hit the ground, they're just trying to get warm, find shelter. And so we weren't going to really be aggressive with calling, so I did some light clucking, some turned and directed the yelping to behind me, and these birds kind of slowly, slowly, snake their way in. They only had to go 100 yards or so. Oh yeah, they did sort of the move left, move back, right scenario. Kind of danced at maybe 70 yards back and forth, and then sort of went around some deadfall and sort of started pa-dumping towards us slowly. Yeah, and they finally came out into view the first time. It went down this little cut, and there was timber between us and the turkeys, but they pop out at probably 60 yards, and they're just slowly working their way. No gobbling. There's one dominant tom and probably 3 subdominant toms, 2-year-olds, I would say, and one strutter. All the others were kind of just popping around, looking nervous, not looking like the regular fired up, happy turkeys we're used to in the spring. And they kind of slowly work their way down towards our decoys within about 50 yards. And as I'm at this point, the understanding of the mindset is that I wanted to kill a turkey desperately. We all wanted to get on the board desperately. It's been 5 days. So I kind of had the opportunity to shoot the first bird that came down before he got in the decoys, before we had the opportunities to bring the other 3 birds down. My thought process was, man, I'm going to take a chance at this and see if all 4 of them will come into the decoys. They've already committed pretty far. But they weren't fired up. They weren't coming to the decoys. They were just kind of filtering our way with some interest in what we were doing. And what we think happened is they saw the decoys with snow all over them, and that kind of boogered them, and all 4 of them started to walk away immediately. Yeah. So that's my guess. In that, they probably, they were probably 20 or 30 yards from the decoys. And it was, at that point, the system was moving in. It was snowing hard, and there was probably a
quarter to a half inch of snow on the decoys that had accumulated just in the, 30, 40, whatever minutes since we've been sitting there.
Yeah. Yeah, so we just figured that really they weren't comfortable anyway. They weren't really all that fired up. Although there was one Tom that continued to strut throughout. I think only just really as a show of dominance over these other birds. But yeah, they were walking away, and in that moment that they're walking away, I'm thinking, no way. There's no way that these birds, there's no way they're going to walk away from us.
My heart sank when I started to see the rear ends of them kind of heading away over into the distance.
Yeah, I get stressed out now thinking about it. Even though we killed 2 birds, I get stressed out at watching. They're just walking away from us. They're like 60 yards. They're all bunched up. I can't shoot. Now I'm thinking I totally messed this up. I should have just shot the first Tom. They're walking away. I shouldn't have tried to get it all. I should have just scratched out the turkey that we could get out of this deal. And so I just thought, well, I'm going to have to give a couple of clucks or something to see if they'll turn. So I gave them just a couple of desperate clucks, and the first bird kind of turned, and they didn't come back to us, but they started going up the way they came down.
Yeah, they retraced their steps, oddly enough.
Yeah, they didn't. I mean, you hunt turkeys like this, you don't really know what they're going to do. They're not fired up to charge the decoys. They're just kind of feeling out the space, I guess, in a weird way. So they turned around. The first bird crosses into an opening. At this point, it's on. I'm not letting him get anywhere. I shoot. He drops. The other birds kind of immediately run up the hill. Ford shoots. Boom. Dead. 2 turkeys on the ground. I think you had to put a second shot on him, but that's not uncommon.
Yeah, in retrospect, I don't even remember why I shot again necessarily. In my head, it did happen. And hopefully it was necessary? Unclear.
Yeah, it was necessary. So we got 2 tops. My immediate reaction was relief and just we got it done.
Yeah.
In an incredibly difficult situation. Ford's reaction was pure joy, as we explained. But man, it's the best feeling in the world. We all know that when you struggle to get something, when you finally get it, when you work hard, when you finally get it, it means all the more. So that felt good, and that was our turkey success story prior to coming here to Nebraska, where we've had some additional success. But it's man, it feels good.
Oh, it was awesome, man. And the other thing, Ben, to be honest, this storm system had opened up on us. It's snowing, I don't know, inch an hour, but it was pushing that rate, coming down hard, and we're supposed to get, they were calling for, I don't know, 4 to 8 inches. And, that just doesn't, I wasn't feeling optimistic about our chances kind of going forward from that. Hell, Ben, you were talking about how we were gonna track these turkeys. That was becoming our next strategy. Yeah. Was it, with 4 inches of snow, we were just gonna start tracking turkeys through the area, which we would have done, I suppose, but
we would have had to.
It was it's not how you draw it up in terms of turkey hunting conditions. So I'll be honest, I was excited too that we were able to seal the deal before that thing really that storm had really laid down some snow.
Yeah, because that was last Thursday, and it snowed Thursday and all day Friday almost too in that country. So if we wouldn't have got those 2 birds down when we did, we would have had 2 incredibly hard days of hunting. And other folks that we met that were, folks that we mentioned earlier that were hunting didn't have any luck. In places where they're really used to having a quick turn turkey hunt, with a lot of birds in the area. So, yeah, that's just one of the many stories from the Trek for Turkeys. If you want to hear all of the stories, every single one of the stories, then you got to go over there to the First Lite's Instagram. That's at First Lite Hunting. And you'll see all the stories. There's going to be plenty of swipe ups to get you to this NWTF website link. Ford, can you tell people what's going to be at that link? Because there's some pretty cool things. If you sign up for membership at that link, there's some pretty cool things that you can get.
So if you sign up for a 2021 NWTF membership, National Wild Turkey Federation membership, $35, you'll also be entered to win a little package we put together, including some Onyx Max memberships, Weatherby 18i shotgun, which is the shotgun that both Ben and I and Harlander, at least, and probably more in our party, are running right now. And if all that's not good enough, you'll be entered to win a First Lite kit styled over Zoom by Steve Ranella himself. So Steve will hop on a Zoom call with you. Woo. He'll say, what are you hunting, where you're hunting, what are you doing? Okay, this is what you need. You need this base layer, this mid layer, these pants. He'll build that kit with you, and then First Lite will mail it right to your door.
That's beautiful, man. Well, like we've been saying, this is our way of putting together a telethon for the NWTF. You'll also hear the aforementioned stories about conservation projects and important work that the NWTF does in this area, but it's not just this area.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a part of this, man. One of my proverbial, I guess, axes to grind or dynamics, I think, is interesting. We talk a ton about conservation in our world in the hunting industry, and that's all good, but I really enjoy seeing what conservation is. And by that, I mean, okay, well, yeah, we want to give dollars to NWTF. Well, what are those dollars doing? And in this circumstance, we're illustrating where that money goes, right? It goes to springhead exclosures in the Bear Lodge Mountains of Wyoming. It goes to a riparian area exclosure in the Custer National Forest of Montana. It's going to timber stand improvement projects in Nebraska and in the South and in South Dakota. So, we're getting in there. We're talking to these guys, Jason, Jared, et cetera, and walking these projects, learning about what they cost, how they were put together, all that good stuff, and kind of showing folks where their money goes when they give to conservation groups, and in this circumstance, the National Wild Turkey Federation.
Yeah, and like I said, we got to meet Luke, a local forester here, and he told us all about how he works in cooperation. His position is a cooperative position with all these agencies and NWTF. And he works with the Nebraska Forest Service, Nebraska Game and Parks, the U.S. Forest Service, and they administer these projects together. So it is a cooperative approach to conservation. And it's easy to just say the word, as Ford mentioned there, and kind of broadly understand what goes into conservation. But then you start talking to people that actually do it for a living and what they go through and the grant writing processes that they go through and how they get the funding and how their jobs come together. Then you really start to understand the scope and measure of the work that's done. So when you're walking around some of these pieces of public ground or even private ground in many cases with the NWTF, you can really appreciate what that habitat looks like, how thin it is underneath those pines, how much habitat there is for turkeys to use. There wouldn't be how less fuel there is for burns in the area. So we don't wipe out habitat altogether in some instances. So all of that is extremely important. And if this sounds like a telethon for NWTF, well, it damn well is one. And so go over and follow the instructions at First Lite's Instagram page and help them out. $35. You can win a bunch of really cool stuff. Trust me, trust us. It goes to a great cause, and the cause that we talk about here quite often, which is turkey hunting. And as we move forward in the year of the new hunter, and the last couple episodes of this year program before we're off the air for good, there's no more important time to be talking about it. So thank you, Fort Van Fossan. We'll keep everybody updated next week about how this whole thing ended. And we'll be yelling at you, try to get us to those 1,000 memberships by what? You say the end of the month, Ford?
That's a goal, end of April. I mean, the trip will be wrapping up a little before that, but it's a nice round number to push, like I said, 1,000 folks to sign up for the old NWTF.
Yep, a lot of people have reached out as we announced the end of a hunting collective in a couple of weeks to ask what they can do and to say thank you. If you really want to say thank you to me, to us, this is a good way to do it. This is the perfect way to do it, in fact. So appreciate you, Fort Van Fossan. And I don't mean to follow you up with Shane Mahoney, but I'm going to do it.
And no one remembers who Ford Van Fossan is. Go.
Go.
No, man. Thanks for having me on, Ben. It's been a blast hunting turkeys out there. It really has been. Tough as it's been, it's always good to chase them around.
Yep, there's never a better day than a day in the turkey woods, success or failure. So we're going to turn it over to a great conversation about possession in the hunting world and our need for possession and what that all means I said about 5 words during this interview, and that's how I like it, because the rest of them came from the great and powerful Shane Mahoney. But before we get to Shane, we had a little audio difficulty during the interview. I did not notice that the audio was a little bit choppy on Shane's end. Phil, the engineer, is fixing her up as best we can. We apologize for that issue. You can still hear Shane. It's just not the best. We try to get the best audio we can in these remote interviews, and this one could be better. Hopefully you still get to hear his message, and it comes through loud and clear. Please now join Shane Mahoney.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there, because they're great and they're super friendly, and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
Shane Mahoney, we had to hit record on this podcast because I forgot, and we were having a great conversation, as we tend to always do. So I'm glad we're recording, and welcome back to the podcast, sir.
Well, thanks, Ben. It's great to be here. We always have a lot of fun, and I always enjoy it. And I'm delighted and anxious to see where our pathway will take us this time. Absolutely.
It's always an adventure. Anytime, whether you and I are having beers at the Wild Sheep Convention or podcasting and across the world, really, in this case.
Yes.
Well, so I wanted to start by normally I thank everyone at the end, but I wanted to start by just thanking you. I know I told you via text that our little show here is coming to an end. In about 3 more weeks will be the last episode of our show. We've had a good 3-year run. Yeah. Moving on to do other things and focus on other things in both the Meat Eater company and in my career. So I wanted to just thank you as I start to reflect on this is 170 some odd episodes of hour-long conversations. When I reflect on all those conversations, I look back, maybe most fondly on your contributions and helping us all learn about the North American model of conservation and our relationship to animals. I think everyone is always inspired by your words, and so I just wanted to start by saying thank you for participating. I'll probably be very more reflective in the next few weeks than I normally am, but I definitely been thinking that the last couple of days, so I just wanted to say thank you.
Well, it's very kind of you, Ben. I appreciate you saying so. Yeah. It's easy when you're having a conversation with another human being who wants to think about these things. As everything around us constantly reminds us in one way or another, our relationships with nature are fundamentally the most important things we have. They exceed and supersede all other issues, because without the natural world, we would never have existed, and without the natural world, we simply cannot exist. So I think it's, it has always been a great way for storytelling to emerge, talking about nature, no matter who. And it's part of what makes us admire people who feel comfortable in nature so much, whether that's a rural family, a man and woman and their children are comfortable around their horses and living with wildlife, or whether it's fishermen who are comfortable on the ocean, or whatever it might be. It's an unending Louvre of kind of possibilities when one starts to talk about animals and our own animal nature and so on. So it's been a pleasure all the time, and I look forward to this one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I as you're speaking there, a question pops into my mind that, the first time we talked on this podcast, you talked about your upbringing, and you talked about the way you were raised and kind of how that shaped you. If you were to meet someone who had no idea about the natural world, if an extraterrestrial came down and asked you, how is it that the natural world has shaped your life and got you to where you are today, how would you articulate that? Because I think that's an important, foundational moment for me when I heard you, explaining that the first time. But I'd love everybody to hear it just in its raw form.
Well, I think I would ask them probably a question first. How do they think they came to be? And undoubtedly, depending on their civilization, they would have either some kind of very empirical, scientific, so to speak, explanation of their existence, or they would have perhaps some kind of mythological notion. But no matter which explanation they gave, it would involve outside forces. They were not the epicenter of their own creation, of course, originally. They had to arise from within some greater thing. That's the universe, whether that's the planet, whether that's the margins of the oceans or wherever it might be. And so I would explain to them that what we call nature is that thing. That is what gave us life. That is what designed us. That is what, to the greatest extent of all things, far greater than our own personal genetics, etc., is greater than all things in setting our expectations, our experiences, our dreams, our physical attributes, our longevity, our mating systems, our relationships with our families. I mean, that this outside thing made us what we are. They may have another name for it, but here on the planet Earth, we call that nature. I think that's the approach.
Yeah. And as we were speaking about before we hit record here, there is a strong feeling that's always been in my life that I'm a part of that, right? That thing we call nature. And I know you feel the same. How did you, again, I'm at some level asking you to repeat things you said I know on the show before, but how do you talk about that connectedness and describe what you always said is animals are not an other, they just are not?
Well, I mean, to me, how I describe it is to simply ask people to, question themselves. For someone who grew up as I did, for someone who had the career I have had, spending truly inordinate amounts of time with animals in wild places, it's relatively easy for people to say, well, he's become that way because of those things, right? But you can take people who have grown up and were born into very different societies and very different circumstances, and yet they are fascinated by the sight of wild things. They may be fearful, they may be happy, they may be cautious, all these things may be part of their reaction, but they are enthralled to some extent by the appearance of something that is living, that is not the same as themselves. And so I would ask them to ask themselves, why should that be so? Why should they be so absolutely fascinated when their backgrounds, they may have been lawyers or doctors and grown up in Chicago or Montreal or London or some other place? Why is it that we all have a certain level of this kind of absolute fascination? Why is it that children of all creeds and colors and creations are fascinated, even as tiny, tiny little humans, with the other life forms that are out there? And so, I mean, I guess I try to reach people on that kind of level. If every day we open up our computers and we see these crazy videos, which you can't help but watch, someone's at a golf course and all of a sudden an eagle flies by, runs down a duck midair.
Yeah.
Or an alligator is out there, sunning himself near the ninth hole or whatever it could be. I mean, we are absolutely drawn to those stories. And I'll tell you something else that's really a finer detail on this. Have you noticed the emotional outpouring that occurs when someone does something kind for an animal, especially an animal unknown to them? If somebody cares for their dog or house or cat or whatever, it's kind of accepted. But if someone rescues a deer that is foundering in icy water, or I saw one the other day where a bobcat had been frozen into railway tracks, and people, totally wild, but people discovered it and helped to free it, and so on and so forth. And the outpouring of human emotion for both the animal itself, but also for the humans who have assisted that animal, is extraordinary. And, sometimes people complain about this and they say, they cared more about the mountain lion who attacked the lady than they cared about the lady who was attacked. There's an element of truth in it. But there's another layer of thinking that applies to that and say, well, isn't that extraordinary that we can kind of relate to the lion equally as we can to our primate friend here, the human? That's not to belittle the aggressiveness or the danger of that nature. These things are in us, Ben. They're not put there by some book we read or some professor at university or some colleague down the road. These are in us, and sometimes it takes a little more to bring them out. Sometimes it takes a little less. But I'll tell you, it is in every single human being, this tendency, this empathy, this connection with all of the others. And so it should be, because we're all connected. We always have.
Absolutely. How do you, and this is, we've talked, as we were mentioning before we record again, we've talked a lot about animal rights and veganism on this program. We've kind of explored how similar our thought processes are with them as hunters. But taking a step back from that for a moment, when we talk about our connectedness with nature and the animals that inhabit it and that are part of it, and then you become a hunter, can you describe, from your view, what are the possible pitfalls as you become a hunter and you start to hunt, pursue, and then kill wild animals, how that might change the way that you see them in a positive or negative way? Because I think for me, it's been decidedly positive. But when you start with that connection you mentioned, and then you insert the pursuit and killing of, those wild animals, it's bound to change how one might perceive that connectedness itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, it does impact it heavily because human beings have obviously great abhorrence of the killing of our own species. We have terms like murder and so on, which are viewed as heinous acts. So we understand at some level that the killing of a sentient being is to cross a threshold, a very significant threshold. I think for those of us who grew up with animals, of course, we always knew they were so very similar to us in so many ways. They could easily be startled and fearful. They could feel lonely. They could become confused in circumstances. They could run out of fear. They could freeze in fear. But they could also do amazing things like rescue people, like our famous Newfoundland dogs, which were notorious for rescuing people who were drowning and so on and so forth. So we came to understand that the animals had these kinds of shared capacities with us. And we understood that it was possible for love to flow between a human being and another animal. And humans knew that they loved them, their horse, for example, or their dog, whatever. But deep down, they also felt and believed correctly that there was an element of love that came back to them from the animal to them. And we have seen too many examples of this for it to be debated, whether it's true or not. It is true. And so when one becomes a hunter, and one undertakes that act of killing, you now see another extraordinary and very intense example of the great similarities between the animals and ourselves. They feel pain. They react in fear. They can go into shock. Their natural systems behave the same way to the impact of the bullet or the arrow as ours would. How they bleed, how they eventually die, and the entire reaction that they show at our hand reinforces, I think, in many people, this very idea that they are the same as us. That doesn't change the natural equation of life, that flesh eats flesh and that we are all interconnected in a food web with one another. But I think for a lot of hunters, and maybe for a lot of hunters, particularly as they get a bit older, more experienced, and witness this and think about this more, I think what hunting does actually is reinforce the idea that they are the same as us, which of course places enormous burdens on us in terms of, how we hunt and how we try to make it as humane and as quick as it possibly can be. There is, of course, always a gradation, a scale of variability in the reactions of any group of people, whether it's hunters or missionaries or political leaders or whatever it may be. And not everybody feels as deeply about those things. And of course, there will be some people who will reject the thinking, because if you hold on to this thinking, realizing how similar they are, that they feel the bullet the same as you or I would, it can be very, it can disenfranchise you from the action altogether. It can sort of prevent you from doing, perhaps thinking too much in some cases. And we all know, well, I can speak for myself, we all know that at that moment, that when after the stalk is over, and there's a point at which you feel you can shoot, and you raise your rifle, and settle the crosshairs and so on. At some point, you do have to drift into a kind of special space where you keep all of that out of your mind. But you have to you have to enter a clean space. And having taken the life of the animal, you're immediately brought back to the same. If you get to it before it has actually perished, you see it gasping for air, you see it bleeding, you see first the alarm in its eyes, and then eventually you see the light come out of its eyes. And it is one of the most profound reconnections with nature, of course, that it's possible for anyone to have. And it should, as well, make us understanding more of the complex dynamics that are necessary in nature. Not just the role of prey, but the role of predator, and then the entire role of habitat that's necessary to, of course, support those natural systems which can provide for human beings and provide for other species all at the same time. It's even the act of gutting the animal exposes you, if you're curious, to the different sizes of the organs in the body of different species. Why the liver may be so big in one, the heart so big in another. If you open the stomach, you see what they feed on, and suddenly you realize that, they've been covering all this ground, searching out for these different kinds of plants, or it's in the case of a predator, there's different kinds of prey. And then you realize, again, that all of that has to be taught in some way and learned by juvenile animals in the same way that little humans have to learn from older humans. I mean, at so many levels, it makes you profoundly, just kind of in awe of the fact that we can all be related in such a kind of absolutely critical way, an immutable way, and that's why, of course, at some level, the thinking of people who are very much in favor of, use of animals, sustainable use, people who hunt, fish, and gather, and can in some way, not in a straight line, but kind of in an arc, come to share a lot of the emotional attachments, the emotional aspects of thinking for people who are more in a non-use mode, animal rights or animal welfare kind of elements. There seems to be a lot of space in between those two groups, between the hunter, let's say, the classic hunter, classic animal rights activist. But it always seems to me that if both of us were on trampolines, we just gave a little bounce to our own beliefs and our own ideas, we would probably eventually see a great deal in common between ourselves. Yeah. Certainly that's my hope, because as I have always said, if I have to choose between a world in which there are, some people who care about wildlife and believe in being part of the ecological relationship and hunt and gather and fish and so on, and a group of people on the other side who say that's wrong, these animals are too precious, they're too much like us, you cannot do this kind of thing, they have rights, whatever. If I have to choose between that and a world where there are people who hunt and fish and gather and so on and believe that we can sustainably respectfully utilize wild things, and another part of the world doesn't care at all, I would much sooner have the first world, where there are people who are in deep association with wild things and with other life forms, and practice the use of them in a traditional way, and those people who say, no, you should not be doing this at all. I prefer that world of values and debate rather than a world where there is significant indifference towards animals and wild things. Indifference will lead us nowhere except into an abyss.
Yeah.
But debate can lead us to places, man.
Yeah. One of the things that I've discovered over my time having these discussions is that, this analogy that I believe that when it comes to animal rights and veganism, we as hunters stand, at the beginning when we're looking at a value system for wildlife, we stand, or animals as a whole, we stand back to back. And then we slowly over time have walked away from each other. And we forgot where we started. We're yelling across this void at each other, using our disagreements as a way to stay apart, when we forget that we start at generally the same idea, as you just described there, that we both value animals. We just have a different way of expressing it and a different way of seeing it in both, the personal sense, the more tangible sense, and the intangible sense of the word. So I've discovered in as I said, through talking to a lot of vegans and animal rights folks, that we can come together. It takes almost one conversation to take the most ardent animal rights activists and bring them 10 steps back from where they are to better understanding of where you and I think equally sit. But I do want to return to a point you just made there about that clear space when you're hunting, about that time, the flow state, if you will, when you have to, make that final act of hunting, which is to kill. I just got back from, I am on now a turkey hunt that's 2 weeks long. And I often get lost in the game-like qualities of hunting, right? I get lost in the learning the animal's habits, overcoming my own obstacles, overcoming weather changes, overcoming the things in hunting that feel like a game. There's conflict and resolution. There is an ultimate goal that I'm trying to achieve. And as I think about those game-like qualities, I wonder, when is it okay to get lost in just the pursuit? You started to answer that question. I think you said it well. But do you see across the landscape of hunters that we get lost in the pursuit too much, and we never do return to that moment you said when an animal is dead, and we get to engender that respect and think critically about our own interaction with that animal? That was really the basis for this show, is to explore what's the difference between being a hunter, and being a conservationist, or being a hunter and understanding ecosystems. And I think the core of that might lie at how entrenched we get at playing the game, the pursuit game of hunting.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot in that question to unpack. But let me start by saying this. I think there is the individual experience that a hunter has, and which he may share with his son or daughter, or with his best friends, or with his wife, or the wife with the husband, etc. There is that story. There is that memory, that history. Then there is a kind of a collective image that is portrayed by, journalists or people who write articles, magazines, television shows, podcasts, etc., which often, of course, particularly things other than podcasts, which are very personalized, they tend to kind of represent the activity, kind of. And as we both know, there are many dimensions to that, which are sometimes commercial and so on and so forth. And therefore, we can create for the viewer of all of this very, very different stories about this oldest way of life, which is hunting. And in many cases, as you well know, an individual hunter will say, he or she will say to you or to me or to other friends, I really don't like the way they talk about what I do. So the first thing I would say is that there is a lot of ways in which the story gets distorted. But I also do believe that, and the importance of that distortion, by the way, is that people who can be brought into hunting and hearing that distorted story can develop certain kinds of cultural expectations of how they perform and what they do when they are. But the second point I would make is that we, one of the great objectives of hunting, of course, is to secure the animal. The ultimate drive, the ultimate psychological drive of hunting is about possession. And while there are many other physical drivers and many other cultural drivers and so on and so forth, the idea of hunting is to possess that animal that you see there.
Yeah.
And of course, the only way to possess is to kill it, because otherwise it will simply be with you. That's the only way you can possess it. And to some extent, therefore, a threshold is reached in hunting, in the human mind, and human emotion and intellect, where once the animal is possessed, when it is dead there, and you can walk up to it, touch its antlers, and touch its body, and know that it will not leap away again, that's a really important threshold in the world. Too few people go to what is the next level, the next threshold, which is to spend time honoring the hunted. As I said in one of my Sports Afield articles 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, we do a great job of honoring those people who seem to have success with hunting, awards and trophies and titles and all this kind of thing. But how often do we honor the hunted, without which none of this is possible? Now, there are traditions in the world, we're familiar with them, European traditions of putting the last piece of food in the animal's mouth and doing various small things to honor the dead animal. I think these need to be brought into the culture of hunting a great deal more all over the world. And in fact, the European expression, which a lot of people know about, particularly the German and Austrian traditions and so on, this is really only a modernized expression of what was the traditional feeling amongst hunters when they pursued wildlife, of course, for the very purpose of survival. I have seen films, old, black and white, grainy, jumpy films of Kung Bushmen in the Kalahari pursue big animals like giraffes, for example, and eland, and pierce them with their tiny little arrows, poisonous arrows, until they bring the animal to a standstill by running in the blistering hot sun over the sand to 8 hours. And in one of the films, there was a translation where these small black men were running after the animal. They had chasing a kudu, big animal, as you know, very impressive, wonderful example of the spiral moment. And they said for the first 8 hours running in the blistering sun, we chased the kudu. But after that, we enter the dream space and we are the kudu. We no longer look for sign, no longer look for tracks, because we are running with him. The end of that kind of hunt is a spear thrust into the lungs and heart of the animal which cannot run any further. But then there are the quiet moments. There were 3 men in this particular case talking in their own amazing click language about the animal, about its beauty, and its size, how well it ran, and all of these kinds of things. And this is something that needs to be emphasized more for young hunters. It needs to be part of what we emphasize. We ought to be moving in hunting experience and training and education backwards from that moment. That should be the beginning moment of their training. and go all the way back from there to learning about, wildlife management and learning about a rifle and learning about cartridges and ballistics and all these kinds of things. And I think it's, some people have it to some extent, greater than others, but I think it is possible to make it part of the hunting culture to a much, much greater extent. And I think it would be impossible for even someone deeply opposed to the hunting of animals to witness those kinds of moments between a still living human who will one day die, of course, just as the animal itself has died and returned to the earth in exactly the same way, who looks down upon this life form and, as I have expressed myself many times, in a sense wishes that he could possess and consume and give life back to that animal all over again.
Yeah.
But of course, the ecology of life does not work.
Now that's a powerful message. I have recently been thinking about and discussing kind of the practical version of my hunting life and the emotional version of my hunting life, and kind of the crossroads of both. And so I can very much appreciate that possession and honor and kind of balancing those two and setting them against each other in some ways. I imagine that you'll have to do. Do you have a personal story of a moment like this where you particularly call back to when for context of how that honoring and that emotion plays into the end of a hunt, something that has happened in your life, or maybe a story that you've heard from someone you respect along the way?
I think for me, Ben, and I speak very emotionally about this activity.
Yes.
I speak very personally about it. And to be honest, I think it's probably true that when I started to first speak publicly, emotionally and honestly about this activity, this natural engagement, it certainly made some audiences uncomfortable. And but I guess for me, it's not so much a single hunt or a single event. It's a series of events that are completely independent, but are very often the same, and which taught me that all of hunting is about possession. You don't hear that. People don't talk about it.
Yeah, I haven't heard it outside of our conversations and what you said today. And I want all listeners to remember that word. It's important.
But so when I was a very small boy, living in a very isolated community, of course, I started out by catching insects and bumblebees in jars, usual kinds of things. And I did it relentlessly. I was always at this. I had, from even that experience first, I can see them in the jars now with the small flowers I would put there, and anything I thought that might keep them alive and keep them well, so that I could keep them in my possession for longer and longer. And then, of course, eventually what would happen with some of them, they would grow weak and they would start to crawl around in the jar instead of flying and buzzing, trying to get out of it through the lid, and so on and so forth. And I'd make sure there were holes in the lid for air to get in, and all the things to try to keep this little animal alive, this insect. I didn't want him to die. Last thing I would, of course, eventually I would possess him until he died. And then maybe when he was weak, I'd lay him out on the ground and wait for him to spring to life. It wouldn't do it. And of course, then I would be able to look at him very carefully and see the hairs on his legs and all what his eyes looked like and his jaws and his stinger and all these kinds of things, which I couldn't really see when he was buzzing around in my jar. And then we used to have things like snowbirds, which would come in on the winter ice, and we try to catch them. And I remember we used to hide under the wharf and get a small piece of wood, like plywood, just something we would find on the beach, and we would put a stick under it with a little piece of rope, and then crawl back underneath the wharf on the frozen ice. There was no water under the wharf anymore. It was just pure ice. This was a very poor community. We put little pieces of fat pork or rolled oats, anything we could get we think would entice these little snowbirds. And when they come in under the board, of course, we pull the string. And the hope was that you would not kill one, but the hope was that you sort of capture one. And I remember doing that and killing one particular time and holding that little bird in my hand. I was a small boy, 4, maybe, certainly no older than that. And this is a freezing cold place. This is a place you can't travel. You can't travel by boat for months because there's so much ice there. And I can still remember taking off my mitt and having that little bird and the warmth from its body, which of course was a complete surprise to me. I didn't think about them being warm as they flew around and so on and so forth. And then feeling, of course, the heat leave its body. And so these experiences get translated over and over and over and over again in my life to the times when I finally began to hunt. I didn't begin to hunt till I was, my early 20s. I hadn't been around it, but to do it myself. And of course, first memorable animal was a monstrous bull moose. It's a long way from a bumblebee and a snowbird. And but what I remember then about that, fell with this one shot. He floated to the ground like a thief. I shot him in the back of the spine and the back of the neck. Instant death. And I still remember, as you got closer to him, first of all, the sheer size. This is a big bloody thing, 1,100, 1,200 pounds. And the size of his hooves, and then leaning against him and again feeling that incredible amount of heat being generated from his body. And then I can also remember finally touching those antlers. I had collected, I don't know how many antlers in my time. I was field researching all the time. I was fascinated by antlers. My own son, my little boy, he had a collection of antlers that, most people never see a collection of antlers. But I was now touching the antlers on the head of an animal that had just died. And that was a totally different feeling to me. And I remember those things as they're far more important than anything in terms of, the shooting or even the tracking, any of those kinds of things. It was, I possessed, and now I could see and learn and feel things about these animals, which I just could not when I watched them, and they were far away from me, and they were living the lives that they ordinarily live. And, far more recently, the cow elk that I took in New Mexico just 2 years ago. I remember, we had filmed this, of course, but I remember she had died. It was a very good shot. It went right through one lung and took a part. It was only once, and she went a short distance and died. But of course, there was enough power in the missile that some bloods pushed back out through and, touched the grass as we walked towards her. There wasn't much blood, but there was enough that you could see it on the grass. And this is again, kind of an expression of her similarity to me. And therefore, of course, there was never any question I would send all of that meat all the way back from New Mexico to where I live on the island of Newfoundland, easternmost piece of ground on the North American continent. And I'm not going to tell you or any listener about what cost me to get that meat back from New Mexico to Newfoundland. But I can tell you that I was very careful about using every ounce of that meat, believe me.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just part of it. It's part of the ritual. And I often regret, even fishing. You know, I was a fanatical trout fishing, especially as a little boy. We lived at it. I mean, I still get emotional in the springtime. The snow starts to ablate. The water runs heavy in the small brooks, and it's black. The water is black in springtime, because with the snow covering it, it looks black. And it's unlike any other time of the year. And, sometimes when I would get home, I'm talking again, 5, 6, 7 years of age, off in the woods fishing, because that's the lifestyle we had. Sometimes when I would get home and I take my trout off my little skiver, which was only a little piece of tree that I cut and picked the leaves off and so on, I still wish that they would simply come to life again. And of course they couldn't. And I was adamant even then that they had to be eaten. And of course my mother was Irish from Ireland, Irish citizen too, as a consequence. And she'd sometimes help us clean them. Of course, if she saw worms in them, in their stomach, like tapeworms or something like that, well, that was it. Then eat them. And this was always a terrible row because the idea of throwing them out was just terrible. So I suppose for me, the leanings were there first. Not many children at 5 years of age. Well, I was turned 6 when this happened, actually, when I turned 6. My father and mother asked me what I would like to have for my birthday, and I was living in another small community at that time. And I told them hens. So for my birthday, my father grew a small hen built, and I had my own hens. And they were incredibly important to me. I collect their eggs. And of course, it was a common practice that we take hens and we kill them to eat. Those particular hens that I possess, that I own, no one was allowed to take. So it's at what point, Ben, did my inclinations, my Irish, Celtic genetics, and my Newfoundland mixtures, my mother's fantastic storytelling of fairies and banshees, and what happened in the darkness, and so on and so forth, and the deep Catholicism of my upbringing, all of that kind of religious mystery, and so on. I mean, at what point all of that came together with a lifestyle, essentially a young ape, free to do whatever they wanted in the natural world? How did that all come together? I don't know. But come together it did.
Yeah. Pieces of the ultimate puzzle, that make each one of us. I think it's good to hear. I've heard you talk personally about your own experiences some, but it's nice to hear you relate those things, because I'm sure everyone listening has those moments that they remember as a child. But also, I would be very unashamed to say that I have a 4-year-old son, and I watch closely how he deals with fishing. He's not yet gone hunting, but we have fished quite a lot. And I always ask him when we catch a fish, would you like to throw it back or would you like to eat it?
Yeah.
And he never says throw it back. He never once has said, let's throw this fish back. He wants to possess it.
Yeah.
And he's very proud of that possession. And then ultimately that leads us to something I know we all quite often talk about, but I want to cover here, of course, is to this idea of how we then translate that possession to food. And I think food becomes kind of the intersection of many of the topics that we've already talked about and we'll go on to talk about, because it because there is an element of a ceremonial nature of eating an animal that you've killed, right? There is honor there. There is possession there. There's many of the things we've talked about. There's the practical elements of cooking it and making it taste good and transforming it from. Our friend Ryan Callahan often says the transformation from a living animal to what's on your plate, it's in and of itself, watching and being part of that transformation in and of itself changes how you think of food, because you understand where that thing came from and where it lived and how it made it and what it ate.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there, because they're great and they're super friendly, and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
Take us to the moment where now you have this food. We've kind of gone from the possession to the honor, and now we're consuming the flesh of these animals. How do you conceptualize that that part of it and how it plays into what we've already talked about?
Well, I think all human beings have some level of understanding of what the higher order uses of things are. And this translates to many aspects of the human condition. And while the taking of an animal's life can be done for other reasons, and ceremonial reasons, are the reasons of, it's part of an experience and people wish to have memorabilia of that, such as antlers on the wall, or whatever it may be. Meanwhile, there may be a variety of end products, if you will, from the hunting experience. I don't think anyone in the world would be able to argue that the consumption of that animal possessed is the most profound and the most justified and the most justifiable reason for lethal possession. If you can capture an animal without killing it, of course, all these dynamics change. But if you possess an animal through its death, mediated by your own hand, then the idea of consuming that animal has this kind of profound beauty for two reasons, at least. One is that food is a very unique thing in a lot of species. In a lot of species, food is used in ceremonial fashion. For example, helping feed a mate. In a wide variety of species, seabirds, carnivores, etc., etc. In our particular species, this is taken to a whole other level. And, we turn it into family gatherings. We talk about it in terms that are usually reserved for our feelings to one another. I love food and the way we talk about taste and how we travel the world to look for ingredients that can be part of foods that are alien to our own cultures, but which we wish to experience. They are part of our ceremonies of death at funerals and funeral rites. They are part of the origins of life at births and so on and so forth, and at any number of religious ceremonies in any number of religions around the world. They are the family dinners that unite people. They are the special dinners that take place on special days like New Year's Day or any particular one you might choose from a particular culture. They even make football games greater because, you cook on your tailgate and you have these massive parties all around food. So food is an incredibly important thing to human beings. And as someone once said to me, Shane, if you want to be famous, write a cookbook, then that's the way to fame. It really is an extraordinarily powerful psychological and physical reality. Now, originally, the only way we acquired food was through hunting and gathering and scavenging. And of course, the most nutritious of all the things we get, the thing that would give us the biggest nutritional bang for our buck, so to speak, was the hunted animal, the animal protein, broken and set free by fire and giving us an explosion of nutrition that nothing else could really equal at the time per unit. And of course, we came to understand, because we knew the importance of food to our own bodies, that when we consumed things, when we consumed living things, we killed. They were what? They were giving us the most precious thing any human being can possess. They were giving us life. And so now there was this inseparability between the lives, and the landscapes, and the behaviors, and the knowledge, and the way of life of the animal, and our own way of life. This is an intimacy that brings everything together. It brings our relationship to them, their relationship to us, and the understanding amongst us of all of the interrelationships between all animals. The consumption of a wild thing is uniquely positioned in this pantheon of cultural considerations. Because as we have shared before, I am certain, the value that is placed on the harvest of the wild thing is always in so many important dimensions, is always different, more nuanced, more enhanced, more sophisticated than if we were dealing with something that is not wild. And this goes to our traditions of sharing the things we take from the wild with one another, which completely, totally recapitulates the original lifestyle of beings as hunter-gatherers and brings it forward into 21st century where, machines are crawling over Mars at our direction and sending images back to us. And yet that original power of our relationship towards wild things as the sources of our own sustenance is carried forward with a profound importance today. And you may be a banker working in Philadelphia, or you may be a business owner operating in Missoula, Montana. You might be a medical doctor working in San Francisco. But something about things taken from the wild and turned into food will always bring something unique and special to your experience. You give people the choice between a pen-raised salmon and one taken at some point in his journey through the cold, wide expanses of the ocean, and they will take the latter for very good reasons, many reasons, and ultimately for cultural and evolutionary reasons that they know they take the best when they take from the wild.
Yeah, and that, as you mentioned there, it sparks something in you when you take part in that, for sure. It sparks something in you that's very biological. that feels like it reaches back in time and in many ways. And I know because of your passion for wild food and your I know your broader pursuit of understanding of how it affects our world and how it affects every part of not only our culture and society, but the economics of some of the food systems that we have, that you started the Wild Harvest Initiative. And it's been some time since you began that journey. Years? 2-3 years? Or has it been longer than that?
Longer than that. It's almost 4.
Can you explain kind of, the Wild Harvest Initiative, I think I know for a fact, looking at the landscape in hunting especially, but in conservation more wholly, that the Wild Harvest Initiative is very unique in what it's trying to do. There's not much out there like it. And hence, I think, for many reasons, but for that one, because it is so unique in what it's trying to achieve, it's important for us, for listeners of this show, to understand and to hear you articulate kind of the origin story of the Wild Harvest Initiative. So can you give folks just the background there, and then I want to discuss some of the developments and then the future of the initiative.
Yeah, it's a lot of people know me for my work in caribou research, or they know me for my work on the North American model. But I really do believe that the Wild Harvest Initiative is probably, for me at least, the most important thing that I've ever really undertaken, because it actually brings together all of these things we have been discussing, Ben, and does more besides. I want people to care about nature. And I want them to care about nature in some personal kind of, not in some act. That's fine too, but that's for a smaller group. I want the average citizen, so to speak, whatever that means. But you know what I mean. I want the average citizen in all walks of life, all creeds and colors, to care about the natural world. And we have to find some way to make it more important to more people. Because right now, with all the distance between us and nature that has occurred, too few people care. Too few people care in order for us to keep what everyone should care. And we have to change that equation. And I've published in probably 25 peer-reviewed journals. I've published book chapters, edited books, and monographs, and written 75 articles or something for Sports Afield and many other outlets, and so on and so forth. But my personal belief is that we have to find some way for people to come to nature naturally. A lot of people place a great store on scientific knowledge, academic pursuits, and so on and so forth. But, Jonathan Swift told us centuries ago that you cannot reason a human being into something, or and you certainly cannot reason them out of something unless first they've been reasoned into it, if you know what I mean. This idea that empirical knowledge will just fix it all is very simplistic. And so I started to think about what could this be? And what could it be that could transcend everything? All the divides and all the social stratas and all these kinds of things. And I landed on this idea of food. And I was aware, of course, that in our world today, the idea of human health, the idea of healthy food, understanding the origins of our food, the idea of fitness and longevity, living long and living healthy, was a real social phenomenon. So I said, well, what about we started to really think about wildlife as food once again? And yes, there were the arguments against it. This is modern North America, not living any longer in the such and such time. And, it's a recreational pastime and all these kinds of things. I said, well, hold on. Let's take a look at this. Let's see how big this is. Let's see how big it is for the 45 million people who hunt and fish recreationally in Canada and the United States each year. Let's just see if this is such an insignificant. So my idea was to compile all of the data existing on the harvest of wildlife and fish by recreational users only in Canada and the United States, and to measure, therefore, the number of animals we harvest off the land in both countries of all species, and the amount of food that is generated by all of that harvesting. And of course, this had never been done before. It had never been done in the history of North America. It had never been done in the history of the United States or Canada. And it had never been done anywhere in the world, I came to eventually realize. And my idea is to show people the number of incredibly healthy meals that we currently are sustainably harvesting from the private and public lands of Canada and the United States. And to ask them to think about what we might be able to produce if we started to think about natural systems and natural habitats as food reservoirs, as health reservoirs for people. And of course, that not only provide food, but also provide running clean water, clean air, and so on and so forth. So I have amassed the largest database in the world on this after 4 years, and with great support from a lot of state agencies and NGOs and industry leaders, so on and so forth. And there is absolutely nothing like it. We have lots of efforts out there to talk about game meat and have game dinners and all those and cookbooks and so on and so forth. And that's all good and it's all needed. But at some point in time, we need powerful data to influence policy and political decisions about the lands that support the wildlife of our two countries. And if we can make people understand that these are reservoirs of health, these lands, and that we are all entitled to harvest in a sustainable way products from those lands, then I think we can make a real difference in how people think about the importance of nature. So we also, of course, in providing this information, we're going to say how much it's worth. So if we have billions of pounds, which we do, billions and billions of pounds of this incredibly healthy food kicking around through our home economies, how much is that worth if people had to go and buy that? Because people like to have a price tag. They want to know how much it's worth. So we are going to tell them exactly how much it would be worth in terms of domestic equivalents, such as beef or chicken, hogs and so on. And in fact, how much it would be worth as a specialty food item if you had to go buy it at a store or at a market. something of this nature. And then we're going to take that value, which is in the many, many billions of dollars, and we're going to add that to the other values of these activities in terms of employment, in terms of sales tax revenues, in terms of all those other benefits, employment generation, and so on and so forth, that has been associated with the hunting and angling world. And we're going to add this massive food value, which, again, no one has ever conceived of doing. And finally, we're going to give the counterfactual, which is to say to people, okay, let's say we stop these activities now, today, including the new activities that have started in both our countries as a result of COVID, where people are desperately trying to get out there to hunt and fish and spend time in the outdoors. Let's say we stop these activities. What is it going to cost in terms of the land that must be taken, the wildlife habitat that must be taken further to provide both ranging space for domestic animals and also to raise the crops that we use, of course, largely to feed them, the wheats and the corns and so on and so forth. And how much fossil fuel will that require, and how much fertilizer, and how much insecticide, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And let me add, Ben, that that's not to condemn what's going on in agriculture. We need industrial agriculture. Of course we do. And that's getting better and better and better in a lot of ways all the time, particularly for cattle. People are doing great things with cattle and with sheep. But I want people to know that there is actually a source of wild food. And not only the meat and the fish, but wild berries, wild fruits, wild fungi or mushrooms, wild rices, medicinal plants, shed antlers, firewood, all these kinds of things. And so the Wild Harvest Initiative is this expansive idea, buoyed up by data, where we can tell you what it's worth in Nebraska, where we can tell you what it's worth in Alberta, where we can tell you what elk are, how much elk is generating, and how much food, and wild turkeys that you're hunting now, how much they are providing to the world. And so we now have this database, and we are working on equivalents. We've come out with certain amounts of information from this activity already. We're now working with a public relations firm to come out with a fairly sophisticated, slow release of this data so that it's doesn't come out in one big bomb, so that people can digest it. And the hope is that we are going to build an alliance of people who harvest from nature: the fisherman, the hunter, the berry picker, the fruit gatherer, the mushroom gatherer, the medicinal plant. All these people who take things from the wild and bring them together and have them represent a component of our societies, and then also encourage them to speak with one voice, because these lands that provide these products are the same lands in all cases. And the final thing that we are doing, each of these is a monumental task, as you might be aware. The other thing we're doing is we're running surveys in states where we are asking the hunters first, and we will do anglers, but the hunters first, how much of their food they share, who they share it with, why they share it with people. Because we want to also demonstrate that the people who live this lifestyle today do exactly the same thing that we did as hunter-gatherers through the long arc of our evolutionary history. We shared. Not everyone hunted their own food. We did it together, and we shared it with those who were not with us at the time. And you and I both know that that is a phenomenon of the hunting, angling world that we share, but it's also true of the berry picker and the fruit picker and the fungi gatherer and so on. We are condemned to share what we harvest from the wild. And this also unites us, this wide consortium of people who are harvesting. We are united not only by the knowledge we gain, the talents we have, the things we pursue in that same space of land, we are also united by this desire to share what we have. When your grandmother bakes a pie made from wild berries gathered by her grandchildren, that pie has a value so far beyond one that is bought in a store that it is immeasurable.
Yeah. The power in that, man, it's innate, and I feel your passion for it when you speak, as always, with everything that you say. And man, I really appreciate it. I've been thinking that's one of the reasons I reached out to you. One, I enjoy our conversations, but I wanted to get an update about the data that you've been compiling. I may go so far as to ask you if there's anything in it. You don't want to break any news on this podcast and share some data that maybe you haven't. But beyond that,
yeah, I mean, what I can tell you is that even if you look at, I mean, we obviously have a strategy for coming out with this information, and we continue to build the database. As a matter of fact, we had a series of meetings with a big database company today. And this has become a very big thing. It's and it may well soon take root in Africa, and discussions about that as
well.
Wow. But anyway, it has become a very big thing. But even if you look at, some of the statistics that we have, I mean, you look at a species like white-tailed deer that in and of itself is providing between maybe 1.5 and 2 billion meals. Billion with a B.
Wow.
You look at a circumstance where turkeys, which you are pursuing now, that are contributing somewhere around 20 million meals based on 6-ounce servings of that animal. I mean, and you add that up across all the species that we are hunting and all the fish that we are fishing, and then all the other natural foods that we are gathering. This is no sideshow. This is not parochial, throwback. This is not immaterial. And for the individual families that are harvesting this, it's absolutely vital to their home economy, to the small communities in which they live. It is vital to those communities, and obviously it has enormous implications for the sustainability of rural people and rural local livelihoods and so on and so forth. And this is the lifeblood of nations, the character of the people who live in those circumstances. And therefore, we have to look at this as not just, there's Ben. Oh, yeah, he's a hunter. He's a bit of a wacko. He goes out, he likes to hunt turkey, spends 2 weeks running around South Dakota, chasing these gobbly birds. It's much more. It's much, much, much more than that. And of course, eventually, you look at something like in Texas where we did the sharing survey, and you find out, that 97% of the hunters in that state share their food. But then you begin to ask, well, how much of their harvest do they share? They share about 43% of it. And they actually share it with more people outside their homes, 3.7 million people outside their homes, than they do inside their homes, which accounts for another 2.1 million people. Like these are big numbers. Now you multiply them across every state in the United States of America, and you multiply that across every province in Canada. I am on a mission to convince American policy and political leaders that we ought to be looking at landscapes as food and health reservoirs. And whether it's public or private land, we should be looking at this to the best of our abilities with the most sensible and sensitive policies that we can come up with, instead of only looking at land as something undeveloped, something that we need to do something else with. And furthermore, because of the science of wildlife management is so sophisticated today compared to what it was, let's say, in the turn of the 20th century or the turn of the 19th century, just imagine if we applied our wildlife management science and our forestry science to managing landscapes for food production, wild food production. How much do you think we could? It would be absolutely enormous. So if there is a new mission for Shane Mahoney, it is to get our two countries and our political leaderships and our NGOs and our state governments and our whoever the hell we can find to actually start advocating for an entirely new management system for landscapes, one that ultimately is based on human health and food provisioning.
Well, that's as you well know, it's a very ambitious endeavor, but I think you are the exact person to take on such a broad challenge. And I know that there are challenges in exploring something so vast across even just our continent. So what challenges have you run into, and what things what hurdles are you overcoming, and how do you feel like you push forward into the future to get to this moment where you ultimately have this case that you can state with data?
I think there are practical challenges. There's challenges of the resources that Conservation Visions has to mobilize this monstrous activity. We could use 10 times the money and support that's out there. God knows if any industry or NGOs or other people are listening and they believe in this kind of a cause, we can use that, because of course that gives us more people and more materials, more social profile, more all the things that are out there. I think the other thing that's a real challenge, of course, is we have to find a way. It's long term, right? You cannot then just come out with something and then throw it out there in a press release or write it in one article in a magazine and, hey, that's great, that's done, that's taken care of, let's walk away. This is a matter just like the North American model concept. It has to be continuously dripped out. It has to have to find new audiences, new venues, new spokespeople, new supporters for this kind of activity. And they have to come from all walks of life. As I said, they have to be businessmen, and they have to be, conservation NGOs, and they have to be hunting organizations, they have to be everything. The medical profession and so on and so forth, which should be more involved in this than they are currently. So, that's a challenge, how to keep people committed to it, understanding that you have to do it over the long term. If the discussions on the North American model had ended 2 years after we first started to talk about it, after Dr. Geist, came up with the concept, if I had started speaking about that in the United States for a year and then said, okay, well, that's it, we're not going to talk about that, do you really think that would be embedded in our systems now?
Yeah. Is this? No. Do you think this is an evolution of the North American model, or a bolt-on, an addition to it? How would you describe it in relation to the model?
That's a really good question. You ask a lot of good questions, but that's a really good question, because what I see this being is the discovery of a profound truth within myself and within all people who engage with nature, and particularly engage with nature in the food acquisition way, all over the world, not just in North. And in a way, it is not so much an evolution of the model, although it has deep, direct implications and relevancies to the model, as you will clearly see, because it deals with hunting and angling and all those things, of course, and valuations of the resource and so forth, the management of it. But in a way, I would look at it in reverse. I think to some extent, this issue is the start of the model, in a way.
Interesting.
We wanted to protect wildlife that was disappearing, and we wanted to find ways to be really effective in doing that. And part of the motivation, of course, for keeping wildlife with us was, of course, to be able to harvest it and to hunt it and to fish. And of course, there was always a huge component of that was about food. We didn't talk about it so much that way, but that's what it was about. I mean, we didn't create the model and all its policies and laws and then say, well, go out and hunt and then just leave the animal there. I mean, every single state and province developed within the model rules, regulations, laws that said you cannot waste that animal. You take that meat out and you use it in some form or fashion. So in a way, this was in some ways, it was at the very origins of the model. But we never talked about it. we talked about game laws, we talked about regulations, and we talked about hunting clubs, and we talked about habitat. We talked all around it, but we never talked about this idea of food. And of course, the North American model itself is, in a way, just a modern part of the long history of humanity's engagement with the natural world for consumption, for the gathering of food, the capture of animals, the possession of animals, and so on and so forth. And so in some ways, it goes way, way back before the model. So I don't see it as so much an outcome of the model, although I know why you asked that question. I almost see it as something that was at the origin of the model, but we had to go back to the beginnings to really think about it.
Yeah.
And it will raise profound questions as it gains more and more influence. But, and as we do the surveys in Arizona and in Texas and in Wisconsin and in Nevada, which we're poised to do now, we will have so much information to bring to people. I think it is going to raise issues around the model, like, well, how do we gain access to all this great meat if I'm not a hunter? Should I be able to buy that meat? Not everybody's going to be a hunter or an angler and things of that nature. So it will challenge certain principles of the model in certain ways, and of course that's a good thing. That's a really good thing.
Yeah.
The most important thing is that the model is about valuing wildlife. That's ultimately what it was about. It sprang from that. We will not lose it. We have to give it a value. And this whole Wild Harvest Initiative is about talking about giving wildlife a value that no one had ever quantified before, ever in the history of the model or before.
I love that you say it that way with value, because there is, as we've talked about, there's political, like this would add a political value to wildlife and wild places that they don't currently have. It would add to and buttress the cultural value that wildlife and hunting and wild food share. I mean, just you can add, economical value. Obviously, you're really just kind of codifying and packaging up what's already there. But I really do appreciate it as I tell a lot of people that listen to this show and that are that participate actively in what we do. The North American model has become, the guardrails for how I think about many things within our space. And I've tried to describe it in many ways, Shane. And I used to think I used to look at it as kind of a bit of the Bible, like the sacred text, and then I didn't think that was giving it the credit it deserved, because it's not meant to be a sacred text, right? It's meant to be a value system, an explanation of the value system, and the practical application of said value system. Man, I've learned a lot over our time, folks. You can go back and listen to Shane and I did. I believe it was a 2-part podcast. It might have been years ago now, on the North American model. We probably go 2 or 3 more hours just talking about that. But we have what I know you mentioned to me a while back, like this seminal conversation or Shane's explanation of the model, all encapsulated in those earlier podcasts. So you can always go, even when the show ends, you can always return back to those. To me, Shane, these conversations become, time capsules for where we were over these last 3 years, both personally and professionally, and then where our community has gone. So, where can people can find the Wild Harvest Initiative through Conservation Visions, but specifically, what would you ask people to do if they're interested in either learning about it, participating, giving?
I mean, I think they should just really get in touch with us, because we are welcoming new partners all the time. Even in this COVID year, the state of Alaska, the Alaska Fish and Game Department, the state of Wyoming, New Mexico Wildlife Federation, and now we have a number of conversations going on with very interesting new businesses that have nothing to do with the hunting space at all, which is really encouraging, and with some international funders now that have discovered us and expressed a real interest in doing something in Africa. We are welcoming new partners, new supporters, And we want them to be diverse. So if there's a medical doctor who, we know the medical benefits, of course, of time in the outdoors and wild foods and so on and so forth. Anyone can simply reach out to us. And it can be just for a conversation, or it can be to figure out how they can, personally get involved. And I think I'll turn this back on you a little bit, Ben. You have a lot of connections. You know a lot of organizations and a lot of individuals. I'd ask you to encourage them to reach out to us too and talk to us about it, and see there's many ways to get involved and at many different levels. And if this is going to succeed, it's going to succeed largely because the alliance that we've built around it is so new, intriguing, and inclusive that no political aisle is going to be too wide for it to jump.
Yeah, well, I can leave this conversation, our last on the Hunting Collective, promising you that I will put the powers that I have, limited or as broad as they may be, into not only having this conversation and letting people know about it, but pushing people to contact you and ask you questions and look at the results when they start to roll out. I know that I've been happy to see backcountry hunters and anglers getting involved with you as I sit on the board there. That's been something that's been super important to me. And
fantastic partner. Fantastic.
Yeah, I am glad that they have stepped up in the way that they have and that allowed you a voice and also been a partner of yours. So we'll continue to push where we can. But Shane, as always, we could go hours more, but I have to actually go and kill a turkey if you allow me that.
Absolutely. I wouldn't keep any man from that. And just remember to honor that fine bird
I will.
When he stops his fluttering.
I absolutely will. Yeah. It's funny. I'll leave you with that. This isn't something that I've been able to really self-reflect on until recently, that when I shoot an animal and it's dying, I have all emotion kind of leaves me. I get into a state of calm and weird, almost sedation that I don't quite understand. I want to celebrate and do celebrate the achievement, and then go on about the work of honoring the bird and taking the meat. But even today, when I shot turkey this morning, and even today, it was there's a weird sedation to my own feeling when something dies. And I don't know that it's overly emotional or it's sad.
No.
I'm not sure I really understand it, to be quite honest with you. But it's interesting that's my own, that's my own emotional state when something like that happens. Continue to explore it.
Yeah, well, it's a long life. There's lots of more. I think the important thing is to reflect on it too. There's a basic difference often between, what might be equally sensitive and equally intelligent, equally empathetic human beings. There's one kind, that sounds terrible. There are certain people who can live through and experience emotional events and be very much in the moment, aware of the specialness of them. But there are other people who can go through those same events and become really reflective. These are the poets of the world. And not all poets write poetry. Some poets simply live a poetic life. So that's what I would wish for you men, that you go forward to live a poetic life.
Yeah. Well, cheers to that. Cheers to a poetic life, Shane Mahoney. Thank you as always for joining us. You're a special person. You're important not only to me, but to our community. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you. And we'll continue to work together, hopefully in the future, on many, many things. And congratulations on how far you've gotten with the Wild Harvest Initiative. And we'll be working together, I know, to push that forward. So thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Ben. Take care of yourself. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye. That's it. That's all. Another episode of the Hunting Collective in the books. I am always thankful for guys like Shane Mahoney, for Van Fossan, anyone out there who cares about wild places and conservation and the animals we chase. That is why I'm here. That is why we are here, presumably. And it makes me happy that we can do it for a few more weeks. Phil, did you get any messages from our listeners after the announcement last week?
I did, yeah. I heard from Luke Reeves, a few other people, A.B. Rich. It means a lot. I told him, I appreciate it. Thanks a ton for listening and for being such vibrant members of the community. And I also just got one more Instagram post from about 5 minutes ago saying a comment on your latest turkey picture saying, why doesn't Phil have one yet?
Well, we've made him wait quite a long time. But coming up here in a couple of weeks, you're going to get it. Me and Phil are going to go out in the woods, and we're going to wrap up this podcast in the only way that I can figure out how, which is to take him turkey hunting and get him a turkey. So, stick and stay for that. We got a couple more episodes to go. I'm excited about the content we're going to put out. I just wanted to say, mirror what Phil said there a little bit, and thank all of you for the well wishes, the heartfelt gratitude, all the things that came in over the last 7 days. I've been turkey hunting, so I haven't been as connected as I would want to be, but I have seen all the messages, all the well wishes, and felt that, and I really do appreciate everybody for sticking with us for 170 some odd episodes. There's no perfect ending for anything, this podcast included, but everything has to end, and so we're going to make it the best we can for the weeks we have left. And I would extend my gratitude and thanks back to all of you who have listened for all these years, who have been a part of these conversations, and have continued to support us. And I'm sure will continue to support us in the years to come as my career and Phil's career at Meat Eater and likely beyond.
What was that? Phil's career, and then that caused you to laugh.
Career, well, because you're going to become a famous hunter after you kill this turkey.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
I think your engineer days could be over.
That's true.
You maybe Phil the hunter at the end of it all. You never really know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really there's not much more I can say other than thank you. It's going to be hard to see this thing end. This is, as I said last week, it's a big part of me. It's a big part of my life. I've had watched my kids be raised while we were recording this. And maybe one day they'll listen back to it and they'll get kind of a time capsule of these 3 years and all of our lives, my life, Phil's life. They'll be able to listen back to these episodes and learn about where we were and what we were thinking during these crazy years of pandemics and my second child being born, and all the things life events that have happened during this show. And it won't go away. So for everybody that asks, Meat Eater will keep the show up. All 177 episodes will remain, and you can listen to them whenever you like, and get and relive some of the cool conversations we've had over the last 3 years. So again, a heartfelt thank you to everybody, to every listener. And especially, I want to, if you'll let me, Phil, I want to say thank you to one specific listener. Is that okay?
Of course.
So my dad listens to this podcast every week, and we talk about it quite often. And we always talk about kind of how many of us, how our dads got us into hunting, how they were kind of shepherd us into this lifestyle, this pursuits. But I have to just thank my dad, not only for being, my hero and the person I look up to, but for pushing me to do the best I can with everything in life and just being in it with me. I was explaining this to somebody the other day, when you're a parent and you feel like your parent or you're in it with your kids, you're in it for the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows, the good times and the bad times. You're just invested in their life. And I feel like my dad is right there with me for all the things that have happened to me over the years, this podcast being one of them. And he was one of the reasons it got started. And if I had one listener and it was him, that would be the happiest I could be. So I want to say thank you, Dad. I love you. And we'll see you next week on the Hunting Collective. Say bye, Phil.
Goodbye.
Clean your gun and tune your bow. We're the Hunting Collective Show, calling hunters new and old. the Hunting Collective Show. Working pick and shovel or working pen in hand, we congregate now as lovers of the land. Mindful and we're focused, we're just living for the search, dreaming of a fire and a salty Gilbert, but we ain't coming back till it's cold and late. We're taking it slow so we can shoot straight. Clean your gun and tune your bow, we're the Hunting Collective Show, calling hunters new and old. Ain't no cold time told.
As you know, the Meat Eater live tour is on April 23rd through May 5th. Chances are in a town near you. What you may not know is you can win tickets to each of these events just by going to a backcountry hunters and anglers pint night. There's going to be a pint night in each of these towns: San Diego, Salt Lake City, Tempe, Anaheim, Boise, Sacramento, Missoula, Portland, Tacoma, where you can compete in Meat Eater trivia and win not only tickets to the show, but a chance to be on stage with all of us. So get your butt to a pint night and we'll see you on stage.